16, and this is between the speaker break. If I am correct, this round will be a closed round. That I believe also has been announced. So you will be left in suspense forever, or at least until tonight. And without further ado, I would like to invite Juliana as Prime Minister to deliver her opening statement on a motion before the House and talk about the liability of children and their parents.
Mr. Speaker, having a child is not a right. Having a child is a duty. If you want to have a child, you must take on all of the responsibility associated with that. This is why today Team Government is proud to propose. My speech is going to have three parts. Firstly, we're going to talk about our burden. Secondly, we're going to talk about the model in which we want to implement this. And thirdly, we're going to present two of our three substantive arguments, which goes as follows. First one, about why parents bear more guilt than children when talking about criminal offenses. Secondly, why the motion better fulfills the roles of imprisonment. And thirdly, how we actually create a more crime-preventing child-parent relationship. But before that, let's get into the burden. We think that the team that will win this debate will be the team that manages to prove two things. Firstly, that their measure takes the moral high ground, and secondly, that it provides a better outcome for these kids that we are talking about. How are we going to implement this? What we say is that when we say children, we talk about somewhere between the ages of 3 and 18 years old. What crimes are we talking about? We think that we are only talking about crimes that weren't imprisonment because the financial crimes are already supported in the status quo by the parents. What do we think we want to happen with the child, right? We believe that rehabilitation centers will be provided that are going to host children in the same situation, kind of like shelters for kids on the streets, only specialized exactly on these people. And we want to recognize out for that we are talking about very extreme situations of children committing crimes. Okay, with that in mind, let's get into my first construct. Let's see exactly what are the things that make you take the decisions you take. But before that, please.
Why should parents be legally liable?
Yes, this is what my argument was going to go into, right? So let's firstly start. I will flag when I get to your section, right? What are the things that make you take the decisions that you take, right? We believe there are three things. Firstly, there are the genes. And we don't believe that we can blame anybody for the genes that you have because they're basically random, right? So let's talk about the other two. Firstly, we have upbringing. We believe that upbringing is 100% determined by your parental situation, right? What kind of situations lead to a crime, let's say? Well, we believe that including situations where parents chronically ignore children, where they ignore their education, where they make fun of the children, where they systematically scream at their children. We think these things happen every day and they happen way too much and they're not condoned by society enough, right? Because if we think about it, these are the things that contribute to frustrations and harmful behavior in the children later on because they weren't treated properly by their parent in their upbringing. And even if we recognize that that parent had to work 12 hours and couldn't be home and it's not really the duty of a parent, we believe that having a child is, again, your choice. If you don't have enough money to support your child properly, so you make sure 100% that your child does not get caught in an armed robbery and doesn't harm other people, we believe you should make a child. If you do, you take full responsibility of what happens later then. Right? The third thing is the circumstances which the person is when he makes the decision, right? And we believe that it is the duty of a parent to restrain children from engaging in circumstances if these things get out of hand. For example, if they get bullied, they have the duty to pull that child out of school and not let them see those frustrations in even more and more and more, right? Fundamentally, we think that since in most cases, right, our legal system recognizes that children in general do not have any kind of consensus to give, as in they don't have a right to vote, right? That means when thinking about, for example, robbing a store. And if we think about that 2 of the 3 criteria that determine our choices every day are in part shaped by our parents, and this is where I'm getting to your POI, right? We believe that they are the culpable ones. They are the ones that that shaped the environment in which you grew up in, and at least in this time frame of years, we believe that the decisions you make are strongly influenced by the decisions that they made that also affect you. So yes, we believe that parents are the ones that are guilty, and from the moral standpoint of a system that we want to defend, we want always to punish the person that is more guilty for an act. Okay, let's get into my second point. Talking about better fulfilling the purpose of imprisonment. Let's see exactly what is the purpose of imprisonment, right? We believe that it has somewhere around 3 purposes. First one is isolation. We don't really have a lot to say about this one because, I mean, we are okay if the system that we have actually isolates the person that actually committed the crime from the outside world, right? The parent, we have proven in the last constructive point. We really have a point to make about deterrence, right? Because we believe that instead of making children fear the repercussions of an action that they might consider doing, and then that thing that frustrates them, right, comes up in their life again, and they forget all of the repercussions and do the thing anyway. Rather, what we try to deter is parents from causing these frustrations in the first place, from parents to abusing this child this way. Why do we believe that this is more effective? Because we believe that the upbringing is a long-term process, right? You have time to redo your mistakes. If you're angry that one time, that is not going to materialize in a crime in yourself. You are going to scream at your child, but you can apologize for doing that. So indirectly, we believe that we have a much better system of deterring crime when we're talking about children committing crime, because upbringing, as we said, is a long-term process. But thirdly, talking about rehabilitation, right? Aside from punishing the actual culprit, we say that rehabilitation holds a very strong point here because it works better, because you actually, in a second, separate the child from the parents who we have identified as the cause of these problems, please.
You would agree that rehabilitation cannot exclude imprisonment as well. They can both take place at the same time.
Yes, of course. No. Rehabilitation in the sense that imprisonment has 3 purposes, right? To rehabilitate the person that has committed the crime that we find guilty, to deter that crime from ever happening, and to isolate the person that has committed the crime, not rehabilitation in the sense that we help people that commit crimes. That's not what we are talking about, right? So we believe that when we actually take the parent away from the child, the parent, which is the cause of the child's frustration, we allow the child to have a way better, more fulfilling life long-term, away from these frustrations, away from the bad parenting that has caused the problems that these children currently have. So at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, because we want a just system that does not just see a child with a knife and assume that it was totally his fault, because we recognize that sometimes the decisions that we take are not entirely ours, and because we want these children to have a way better and more fulfilling life later on, please propose.
Isn't a duty. Having a child is a privilege. And my opponents seem to believe that only the parents influence the child. A direct quote that I have is, parents shaped the environment. But what does a child do from the time of 8 to 4? They go to school. They go to places where they're influenced by other people and not just their parents. To put all the guilt, put all the liability on the parents when there are other factors that influence a child, like their friends and like bullying that's apart from the parents, I would strongly advocate the opposition of the resolution, because they attribute all the problems to the parents, when in fact, the majority of the time, and lots of the time, there are the problems with their environment apart from the parents. I'll be getting into that and explain their reasoning and why it can be applied elsewhere, and not just to the parents aspect, and then go into our own contentions that I'd like to bring up for you. The first point that I want to bring up for you, or my first contention that I will bring up for you, is the reasoning for why the parents create this bad environment. Next, the false sense of justice, and then stricter parents. My partners will be demonstrating the moral aspects later in their speeches as well. Now, the first point that I want to bring up is talking about their upbringing. Their upbringing isn't exclusive just to their parents. It includes multiple things. Some examples that I have for you here is what happens if you're an orphan and you're in an orphanage. You don't have parents, but you're shaped by whether you go to a foster home or the people taking care of you in the orphanage. Should they be liable? Under this motion, they would technically not be liable because it was never mentioned in their model and their first constructive speech. But should those people inside the orphanage, should they be the ones that are actually liable? I would think absolutely not. They're responsible for taking care of multiple children who have been affected by their parents' decisions whenever their parents left them there. They never even really knew their parents. That can be detrimental to them. The people taking care of them, should they be the ones that are responsible? Because they're the ones shaping their lives. Under their contention, talking about how it's the parent shaping the environment, if it's somebody else shaping the environment, they should also be liable. Yes?
When you're talking about foster homes, you talk about tutors, not parents per se. We don't believe they fall under the motion.
Tutors and foster homes are two different things. To my knowledge, a foster home is whenever a child goes to an orphanage and they're sent to another home elsewhere where they can be taken care of by different parents that are not their actual biological parents. That's my understanding of a foster home. We may have a different term for it here in Romania. That's my understanding of a foster home. I don't believe those two things, a tutor and a foster home, are actually correlated whatsoever. Moving on to the next point that I want to bring up for you, which is the LGBT community. The LGBT community is extremely bullied and abused by other individuals in the public, but is it their parents' fault? Should their parents be liable for their genes? I don't think they should be whatsoever. I don't believe the LGBT community should have the parents be the ones being abused and liable for the actions of individuals. They're being abused in the public elsewhere. Their environment is hostile, and their parents should not be the ones held liable for other individuals who are homophobes abusing them. I don't believe this motion actually accounts for that information, and their model obviously does not. Yes?
Sir, your sexual orientation doesn't deter you from getting a good education.
We're not talking about education at this point. We're talking about bullying and how it shapes your environment. My whole entire point is talking about how whenever you mention how parents shape your environment, lots of other factors also shape your environment, and it shouldn't be the parents' fault to receive guilt for those other factors. That's completely wrong, and it's actually a logical fallacy. It's the ends justify the means. It's completely wrong in its entirety. Moving down to the next point. The reasoning is not exclusive to children. The reasoning is not exclusive to children. They keep mentioning how it's the parents' fault for the environment, but it's not exclusive just to the parents. Moving down to the next point. My first substantive that I would like to bring up for you is the false sense of justice. The false sense of justice. What do you do? What are you telling the child whenever you make the parent liable for the problem? Not at this time. What are you doing to the child? You're giving them a false sense of justice. You're saying that you're invincible. That no matter what you do, because I'm pretty sure a child at 18 can make a logical decision to do something, no matter what you do, if you rob a store, if you want to get a pack of cigarettes or steal a beer, your parents are the ones that are liable because supposedly they gave you a bad environment, even if they gave you a good environment. Under their model, even if their parents gave them a good environment, they're still held liable if the child makes the wrong decision. That should absolutely not happen under this motion. Moving down to my next point. Now, what's the impact to actually passing the motion? You create stricter parents. What does that do? It's only more hostile for the child. Whenever you tell a parent that no matter what your child does, you're going to be held accountable, not at this, I'm trying to get to the point. You're going to be held accountable, what are the parents going to do? They're going to keep tabs on their kids. Just yesterday, some Romanians and my partners and I went to this really cool jazz cafe. We told our parents they were going to a jazz cafe. They were perfectly fine with it. Now, if they were held liable for if I were to steal alcohol at this jazz cafe, I'm pretty sure, number one, they wouldn't have let me go, or number two, they would have followed me there. What does that do? It doesn't help culture. It doesn't help the kids. It only puts them in a more stressful environment. I'm pretty sure everybody here that has strict parents does things wrong because they're speaking up, they're speaking out against their parents. That's harmful. It only leads to more crime and violence, not less crime and violence. Yes, your question?
You have to prove that on a comparative, children are more guilty than parents. Not that we don't have to prove that parents
That is a
make
comparative.
all of the guilt.
We just brought up the comparative. I mentioned how it's not the parents that are receiving all of the guilt, and even then, it's the kids making the decision to do so. Next, you mentioned rehabilitation and how it's really important. Now, we asked a point of information about rehabilitation, saying that you would agree that the majority of jails have rehabilitation, and they agreed. But they re-clarified afterwards, kind of defining their rehabilitation to be different. And what I wrote down on my piece of paper is rehabilitation. They think rehabilitation helps them feel better about what they did, and how rehabilitation will tell the students or tell the kids that what you did is not wrong because of you, it's wrong because of your parents. The problem with that rehabilitation is it doesn't fix anything. Saying that, yes, you robbed a bank, but it's your parents' fault, doesn't tell you that robbing a bank is wrong. It gives you a false sense of what's right and wrong. It gives you a false reality that only fosters and creates more crime. Not at this time. It only fosters and creates more crime and better prejudices, more prejudices towards who? Your parents. Then you're creating a society when kids don't trust their parents. When kids don't like their parents because they believe all of the wrong, all of their problems stem from their parents and not from their own actions. It removes the sense of responsibility these children have. It destroys their culture. Instead of a child going and buying something for themselves and taking full responsibility to do so, instead if they make a wrong decision, they can immediately blame it on their parents, instead of actually taking responsibility for the action. Rehabilitation and regular prisons that you would receive under the opposition team tells the kid that what you did isn't right, but you can fix it. Not that you're broken, but that you did something wrong, and yes, you can fix yourself, and you cannot do it again. It deters the crime in the future. I believe the opposition team stance, not making the parents liable, is way more imperative. You should absolutely uphold our side because it actually results in deterring crime and making these kids learn from their mistakes, giving them responsibility. My opponents do the complete opposite. What I have shown you in my speech is that my first response to substantive was talking about the reasoning, and how the reasoning isn't unique just to the parents, and how the reasoning applies to all of culture that affects them. And the LGBT instance, it would be the majority of bullies, not their parents. Why would you make the parents liable for the bullies? That's completely absurd. We also mentioned how their model doesn't include whenever a parent isn't the reason for giving them a bad environment, and I gave you my other 2 points talking about the false sense of justice and stricter parents. For those main reasons, I know
Can we get the stream on that thing?
Yeah.
Totally.
Yes. Please, please.
Exposed.
Whenever?
Yeah.
2 syllables are the first sounds that you make with your voice that is able to sound like human speech. Either mama, either papa, either tata, depending on your language. But the names, the parents, the figure of your parent is the first thing you utter with your slightest form of being able to relate to the world. Your parents are strong figures that are near you and they do influence you. Do we think today that parents are the most relevant factor in the outcomes of a child's development, and they are responsible for other environment from that? With that being said, I want to start a bit with burdening democracy, because we want to understand from their side why the child is the person who has the biggest part of the guilt in the action that they've done, and not the LGBT school, the homophobic people, not the people from whatever other environment. We want to know why kids are the ones that should be blamed for their actions, not the big impact. So, with that being said, let's talk a bit about as a response to their points on LGBT homophobia and the school that the kids attend. We think that here, of course, those are relevant factors. Kids are away from their parents in those environments. But at the same time, we think that the parents have an inherent duty to make sure that the environment is going to be good. Because after all, what happens when you are a parent is that you bring somebody into that with strong duty to make sure that everything can be as good as it can be. That's your duty. If you could ask them for consent to make things be worse or even terrible, that would be great, I guess. That would be justified. But you can't, and it's not. So, if, for example, you can't afford to give your child an education where he's not being abused, if you live in a bad neighborhood and the way to the school is full of criminals and the school is full of criminals, we think that's on you. You should have thought about all of these things when you wanted to make the child and move out, get more money, or don't make the child at all if you're gonna expose the person to so many harms. But yes.
Are kids required to go to school?
Sorry. Kids are required to get an education, however it can be. It's most convenient to be from the school. Don't think that's relevant at the moment. Want to hear more about the next question. So, that being about the general part of the environment, talking a bit more specific about homophobia, we think that the sort of abuse that generally happens with LGBT people and other things that you can discriminate about someone is rather horizontal abuse. Your peers are the ones that make folk of you. Horizontal as opposed to being vertical as related to authority figure that is going to attack you for that. So we think that the result of this sort of abuse, your peers attacking you, is at worst going to result in self-hate and not in the sort of rebellious nature against authority that people who end up committing crimes have, that develop that by being abused by their authority figures in the form of their parents. Now, about again good environment at home, that's gonna be my extension, which I think I'm gonna start moving. Alright, so about kids that receive a good environment at their home, why do we think that this measure is gonna actually help them to, and is not a punishment of their parents? We think that this measure is actually creating another layer in the parent-child relationship that is going to prevent crime and that is going to strengthen their bond. So let's see exactly why. We think that in the context of families that are decent, that operate properly, in which parents offer love and objects that children want and need, basically when things go right, we think in those contexts the child is going to care for the parent. Yeah, sure.
You would agree that this is the proposition team's view of what a good family is, right?
Yes, I think that's
Okay.
a family that's functional. I don't think it's maybe the greatest thing there is. I think that this sentence should generally work. So anyway, in this sort of family, we think that the kid becomes close to the parent. We think that they start to feel the bond with their parent, and in a sort of way, they feel a slight duty for the parent that they're having. And we think when we add this another layer of responsibility they have to their parent, because they would understand that if they do something wrong, something that is illegal, their parents will get hurt. It's not only on them, it's going to be on their parents. They care about them and that they too care about them. So how we think this is going to affect the relationship? For one, as opposed to what the opposition said, we don't think it's going to create stricter parents. Because realistically speaking, how this problem can be solved very easily is by rather more trust rather than strong measures. And if a parent was going to be strict, we think he was going to be strict anyway, because parents care about their children and are strict about them because they want them to have good lives in the vision of the parent. We don't think that parents would impose measures just because they fear they will get into trouble. It's just their perspective on care. If they're gonna be strict, they're gonna be strict anyway. This measure would not affect that. Now, so if that doesn't happen, what's going to happen? We think this is a way in which the bond actually becomes more stronger, because now the child has some sort of power over their parents in the way that if they do something, they can put the parents in trouble. And this, in a way, equalizes the position, but not by lot, which makes it feel more close and rather more trustworthy. But what happens after that? We think that these kids, regarding crime, would be okay. They wouldn't do crime because they have a good background. But in a different context, maybe in a one particular rebellious night with other people around, some place far away from their parents, they might want to do something that is rather illegal, such as drugs or drinking or driving a car without a permit and while being drunk, something like that. And we think that in that context, what's gonna happen is that rhetoric of I am not on my own anymore, I have responsibilities to my parents, they are gonna get in trouble, and they won't do it anymore, because what they want is simply break the rule of their parents, break a bit of their authority, show that they are still on their own, but not really cause terrible harm, that they still love. So with that in mind, we think they will refrain. So if they, in that case, they escape crime, they escape criminal records, they escape things that would haunt their futures. And with that in mind, if we can have parents that are held accountable morally and kids that avoid trouble, we think we should propose this.
Thank you very much for the speech, and I would like to invite Sam as the second speaker of the opposition to continue the case on the opposition side.
Under the propositional side, what you have is actually a very interesting situation. For their second contention, they were talking about the fact that it actually fulfills imprisonment better by the fact that the motion is upheld. And before I say this, I want to say that I absolutely love and respect my parents, but under this idea, if you're mad at your parents, you could go do something illegal, like go have fun with your friends even though you're underage, like to drink or something, and then send them to jail as a response. I don't think this is a very good thing to uphold, because I don't think that my parents would want me to have this power, much less I wouldn't want myself to have the power. I would want responsibility for my own actions. And it's really in this speech that I would be going down, and I would be recapping some of the arguments they presented, showing how it is that our case still stands, that there's invalid, and I'll be with the other half of the split talking about moral liability. Alright, so at the beginning you talked about how the first words you could speak are mama and dada. I think that's great, that's true, I agree with that. You also talked about the fact that parents are really the main influence. I've got two main responses. First, it is not them only, there's other people. And secondly, sadly, sometimes they aren't actually the primary influence in life. If you think about basic school hours, if you have 8 hours of school and another 4 hours you're awake at home, you're actually spending twice as much of your day at school than at home. And even with weekends, working, stuff like that, overall, there's other people in your life even more than that. And a lot of people like to go see friends during the weekends. So that would subtract even further. Alright, in addition to that, they were talking about the fact that you want to provide good environments. First, you have to go to school. There's some things you just have to do, which leads into my second response, that some environments are just unavoidable. Sometimes, no matter how hard you try, what you do, the end result is that you end up, or your kid ends up in an environment that you don't like. Going on, they talked a little bit about peers and bullying in school. I do want to point out that according to the GLESN, which is just really a study of the LGBT, 50+% of students under their study actually received harassment from teachers at schools. It's not really a question, it's just a fact that their peers are not the only cause of stuff like this. Additionally, they were talking about good homes, how you want to provide the best home possible. 2 responses. Again, sometimes children make the wrong decisions. Sometimes it doesn't matter how well you parent. Sometimes they're going to do what's wrong. That's reality. And secondly, they're still not the main influence. I'll take your first question.
The question is not whether community plays a part in decisions, but whether why are children more guilty than parents? That's the question.
Yes, thank you. So that's not necessarily the question that we have to uphold, because if you think about the logic of holding parents liable because of their influence on children, what you end up with is the idea that everybody else who's influenced them in that aspect should have legal liability. So if you take their same logic and apply it to everyone else, then the motion in itself fails. Alright, so moving on, our first points on either case, I actually want to address those together, talking about basically upbringing and then our point about false sense of judgment. I'm going to give you 5 ideas under this. The first is that, once again, children make the wrong decisions. Secondly, parents are still not the main influence. I've said this before, but the same logic applies. Third, it is actually displaced liability, because whenever you put that liability on the student, what you do is actually give them incentives to do the right thing. While on the other hand, it actually isn't them, if you go for a proposition, it actually isn't them that takes that punishment, it would be their parents. And in some cases, I think that may be a little bit too strict, specifically in how they're punished, because a punishment for a teenager, a punishment for a child, may not be very strict compared to a parent. While a parent, nothing may happen badly. If a parent receives a teen conviction, then they may not receive punishment that is very strong or burdens them a lot in their life compared to that. So if you give a 3-year-old a timeout and an 8-year-old a timeout that's the same length, I don't think they're going to handle it the same. One's going to be like really suffering, and the other one will be like whatever. Like that's just reality. And the first point is that it's actually a contradiction. So under his point, he was saying that parents are going to be stricter by putting these laws on. But then, whenever he was talking about good families, he said they were going to be strict anyways. So if you're talking about good parenting versus bad parenting, or good parenting versus parenting in response to laws, then they really have the same effect, that it actually makes things stricter all around, regardless of whether it's there's a law there or not. It just depends on the family. All right now. So I'm going to move on to the second half of the split and talk about, in my case, the moral side. So what really should be happening with the liability is that prior to really acknowledging free will as a person, there should be certain punishments. And the second point would be that after free will is really acknowledged, there should be different punishments. But then neither of those are actually on the parents. So prior to developing free will, so this would be like a kid, like 3 to 7, 3 to 8, however you want to look at it. It depends on the child. First, let's look at non-harmful encounters. So if you have like a 4-year-old, they're really adventurous. They'll do pretty much anything. So if you have something on the ground, say someone's purse or someone's phone, or even on the counter, they may just grab it and walk off. Whenever you see them walk off, you're going to say, oh, come here, like that's mine, I need it back, or maybe ask that they give it back, etc. But you're not going to say, your child to the parent, your child took my phone, therefore I can sue you, because you would handle it differently if someone, like a man grabbed your purse and ran off, and then if a child grabbed someone's purse and ran off. Those are 2 very different things. And then secondly, under this, you have liability on things that are a little bit more harmful. So if you have something like that, what should happen is the liability should be put on the person that set up that situation. So in a convenience store, or let's go to something like a walkway. So if someone puts a vase in the middle of the walkway, someone's going to trip over and break it. If a child trips over and breaks it, then whoever put it there should have to replace it. It shouldn't be the child's parents or the child's job to actually replace that. I mean, there's some simplicity in that you don't set yourself up for failure and letting your property be destroyed. You don't put your mailbox in the middle of the road. You would put it next to the road or near your house. Our second point is talking about after free will development, so pretty much teenagers. So subpoint A would be destruction of property or stealing. Whenever a teenager destroys something or steals something, they just pay for it themselves. That's how it works. They can work, or they have allowance or savings or whatnot, and they can be liable for that, and it means a lot more to them whenever they specifically have to replace something than their parents. And our second point would be serious offenses. So I've actually planned on going into law, and I know a juvie prosecutor that I really just talked a long time about different areas of how it's handled. So the first thing that happens is they're discouraged by having like stay in a cell overnight, something like that, and then you may get something like parole, and then you may have to stay lengthy in a cell, and then eventually, like if something's really bad, they'll try as an adult. But I don't get to go and steal a car so that my parents go to jail, or steal a car so that my parents are on parole. What gets to happen is whenever I do something dumb like that, I get to pay for that. And it's simply for the fact that by voting proposition, you're misplacing liability, and you're not doing what really motivates them to do the right thing. You're not actually solving the problem. The point of negative influence, that absolutely motion should not be upheld. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And it is now time to call upon Dominica as the third proposition speaker.
Honorable judges, what team opposition doesn't understand today is that good upbringing doesn't mean 100% time spent with your parents in perfect environment. Good upbringing means having a parent telling you after you come home from a school that maybe has some classmates that your parent doesn't like, telling you, you know, those kids are not the kind of kids that I would like you to hang out with. This is what it means. It doesn't mean being in a perfect bubble of no bad things around you. It means having somebody tell you what is right and what is wrong. And we believe that a parent that cares about a child, a parent that fulfills their responsibility towards the child that they have, should do such a thing. And today we believe that team opposition overburdened us when they told us that we had to explain such a thing. I will start with clarifying some things. First of all, we have stated that our burden today is to explain exactly two things. First of all, what measure takes the moral high ground? No, thank you. And lastly, what in what world we have a better outcome? Team opposition didn't set any burden for themselves, and I will show you today how they haven't fulfilled even what they had to do, which is basically the same thing on their side. I will have two main points. First of all, where the guilt falls in this whole discussion about who is actually guilty of the actions that have been made, and lastly, what the best outcome is. But before that, please.
Did I not protest the burden in saying that we don't have to prove that it is not specifically the parents, it's simply them and other people?
Okay, fine. Your burden is still to demonstrate why the status quo is better than what we have right now, which is basically for the kid to be punished for what they did. So, exactly to clarify this, my first point, guilt. My first sub-point, upbringing, where I will explain exactly what happens. Their response to the first speech, which was basically the fact that we told you that upbringing is 100% the responsibility of the parent. They told us that, you know, kids go to school and they meet people that might not be a good influence for them, and so on and so forth. We believe today, no thank you, exactly that, as I mentioned at the start of my speech, your parent doesn't have to keep you away from bad things, but rather tell you this is not okay for you to do if you saw it in somebody else. So we believe that if a parent is responsible enough to actually fulfill their whole duty as a parent, they will do such a thing and they will explain to their kids what is good and what is wrong. No thank you. Next, they told us that they invoked this whole idea of LGBT kids and parents and so on. And our response, which they completely ignored and they haven't talked about this more later, was that, first of all, it doesn't matter if your parents brought you up as being more hateful, let's say, or disliking a certain category of people, right? Be it racial, be it a sexual minority, and so on, your parent has a duty to teach you that in no other circumstance, violence is not the right. So yes, if a kid bullies another kid for being gay or lesbian or whatever, yes, the parent of the bully should be held accountable for those deeds. Next, they told us that they invoked this whole idea of orphans, no thank you, and in the POI we did mention that tutors don't fall under this motion. They had this problem of foster care and tutors. We believe that today we talk about kids that are being raised by their own parents. Next, the relationship between the parent and the child. Mihai's argument has never been tackled, and here is where I want to add more to what he said exactly about how parents actually shape what kids become. First of all, they have never tackled the fact that it is very important for these parents, if they fulfill their job right, to have a but a strong bond with their kids. These whole points of what they brought with, like kids blaming their parents for their problems and so on, would not happen in a functional family where kids and parents actually discuss. Where I want to add is that we believe that kids inherently get attached to their parents, right? So here goes a point that will furthermore explain, no thank you, why we believe that parents are even more held accountable for the upbringing of the kid. Because when you're small, you naturally agree, or rather don't disagree with what your parents do, right? And naturally you pick up some of their habits and actions and so on. So yes, furthermore, we believe that when a kid does something that is bad, the guilt falls on the parents' shoulders, because realistically speaking, the kid didn't have a choice when they did that. They just did it because they thought, they were brought up as thinking that was the normal thing to do, right? Last point, actually yes, go on. You.
Would you not agree that some kids still make wrong choices regardless of whether...
This was exactly my last subpoint under this clash of guilt. Kids do bad things. This is what they told us. Again, we come to say that, as I said, upbringing doesn't mean parents on you there forever just watching you, but rather that if the upbringing were right, so if the guilt falls on the parents' shoulders, it wouldn't if the upbringing were the right kind of way, right? So still, kids do bad things, but exactly because their background and exactly because their upbringing wasn't right. Okay, you might rebel and so on. You might steal just for fun. No, thank you. You wouldn't do that if your mom would tell you stealing is not right. And if she convinced you that stealing is not right. And this is what we believe today. So yes, it is very linked to the fact that the guilt falls on the parents' shoulders, and as such, linked to the motion, we believe that parents should be held liable. Lastly, the problem with what the best outcome is. They have told us that what we say is wrong, but they have never actually showed us why it would be better in the status quo. So, no thank you. This is where we come to talk about exactly why we believe the best outcome would be in this case. They have told us that their point about kids not being held accountable and not having responsibility when they do something. They have completely ignored the fact that we mentioned that when a parent goes to jail because of something that a kid did, the kid doesn't just stay home and enjoy his no parents time home alone. No, they go into a rehabilitation center, no thank you, where first of all, the most important thing is that they are being separated by a factor that tinted their childhood in such a way that they became a person that did something that is not right in the society that we live in. So you separate them from a bad factor, and second of all, you put in place of that bad factor somebody that can educate them and explain to them why their upbringing wasn't right, where they went wrong. Because if your parent didn't ever tell you why stealing is bad, you have maybe you don't know why stealing is bad, so you need somebody in that place to tell you why it is. Right? So we believe that in this case, the best outcome for the kid, first of all, is that they do become rehabilitated and they do get the education that you would want in order to be a functional part of the society. And second of all, the fact that parents are being deterred from not caring for their children, and the fact that themselves, they get punished for not caring for them, which again is linked to the fact that we believe a parent, if they have a kid, are 100% responsible of their upbringing, and there's no excuse for this. So what have we brought in this match today? First of all, we believe we have demonstrated why guilt falls on the shoulders of the parent. Because as we have explained and many points were never tackled by them, we believe that the background is more important than on-spot decisions that they say kids make, which are influenced by the background. And lastly, that the best outcome for the society, for kids and for parents will be in the case of applying this motion. I have never been proud of this proposal.
Thank you very much, and it is now time for Austin to deliver the last of the substantive speeches in this round.
Hi, Mom. All right. When looking at the proposition team's case, I would ask them to listen to the words of possibly the greatest rhetorists of the 20th century. The American band, the Beach Boys, when they wrote a song entitled, "Wouldn't It Be Nice?" Wouldn't it be nice if you could truly gain the proposition team's advantage by voting for the proposition? Wouldn't it be nice if the proposition team's case actually stood in today's round? What I'll be showing you is that actually, when looking at their arguments, we'll use a simple logical tool called reductio ad absurdum, meaning we reduce it to its absurdity, or its end. No, I'm not saying all their arguments are absurd. They did make some valuable points. However, quite a few of them do indeed contradict themselves. We'll be valuing the main arguments in today's debate round, while also focusing on the rest of the opposition team's contentions, showing why in the end, indeed, we should stick with the opposition, because no, it's not the parent's fault that the kid committed a crime. Sure, the parents may have had a little bit of influence in raising the child, but it doesn't mean that we should charge them under the law. With that, let's go into their quick point. First of all, they mentioned how they're not saying that children spend 100% of their time with their parents. But what was very interesting is that in the very first proposition speech, if you remember, the proposition speaker said that parents are 100% of the influence of their child's environment. So what that means is that maybe the parents aren't necessarily with them, but the opposition team's contention is that if the proposition team is true, we see quite a contradiction between the first and third speaker. Sure.
We were talking about the concept of upbringing, not the concept of circumstances. Do you agree that parents are 100% of the upbringing of a person?
What we were saying is actually, what your point was, if you take that and also apply it to the rest of your argumentation, is that it was also talking about the environment and upbringing. So actually, it's not an either or, it's a both and, to answer your question. So now let's go on to the next contention, which was talking about how they proved the moral high ground, and we must prove the moral high ground and a better outcome. I'd like to talk about better outcome really quickly. My partners have actually mentioned a logical fallacy. The logical fallacy was something called ends justifying the means, which is saying that just because something that you do is bad has a good outcome doesn't mean you should do it, because something you're doing is bad. Actually, in America, this is how we've justified the death penalty through this logical fallacy. We have said that since we have lower crime rates, then we should have the death penalty, which is inherently flawed, because killing people shouldn't take precedence over stopping crime, because killing people makes us just as bad as the criminals, as the great Batman once said. So if we stick with the philosophy of ends justifying the means, and we see simply that the logical fallacy is indeed inept, and we take their argument into consideration, we see that simply they don't have the moral high ground. The proposition team does not have the moral high ground because they are saying that the ends justify the means, on top of a bunch of other argumentation I'll be getting to throughout this contention. So now let's go on to the next contention, specifically talking about how the parents don't keep you from doing bad things. And we'll talk about bullying also in a little bit, but I'll take this question first.
Why is it the duty of the judicial system to teach your child about individual responsibility, please?
Okay, that's a very good question. But what we're saying is not necessarily that it's the judicial system's purpose. What we are saying, however, is that the judicial system's purpose is to treat everybody fair and equal under the law. Because if you were to say that somebody in the past has influence on you and then they are liable, well, what about the person that had influence on them? What about their parents? What about the parents before them? There is no logical end. So truly, reductio ad absurdum, if you take their argument and their reasoning to its extent, we simply see it's illogical. Now let's go on to the next contention, which was specifically saying how the parents necessarily don't keep you from doing bad things. And if they don't keep you from doing bad things, then that's a crime. They also use this to justify the bullying point. They said that if somebody bullies in school, then the parent will be thrown in jail. What's very interesting is that my partner's contention was actually talking about how the teachers and the peers in the environment do have an influence on the student, on the child. But also, if we cross-apply what the first proposition speaker said, yes, the first proposition speaker said only major crimes would be charged on the parents. Newsflash, bullying is not a crime. They claimed that the bully's parents would then be thrown in jail, which simply is not the case. They don't actually solve the problem. Again, I'd like to quote the great Taylor Swift, who said that Band-Aids don't fix bullet holes. They actually aren't solving the problem. I'm so sorry, I can't take your contention. Now let's go on to the next point, which is talking about how it's important to have a bond with the kids and this functional family. What's very interesting is that if you actually listen to what the proposition team is saying, they are saying this is what we think a functional family is. But who gave the proposition team the authority to say what a functional family is? They don't have the authority. We don't have the authority. It's not our authority to determine what a functional family is. Rather, if we are to go with the law, since we are acting as the government of all states, if we are to stand with the law, we treat everybody equal under the law. If you violate a crime, it doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter your upbringing. If you violate a crime, you get punished because you committed a crime against society. Their next contention was talking about how you don't show why it's better. We haven't shown you why the status quo is better. Whereas, if you actually look at every single one of the contentions that my partners have been bringing, they've been mostly rebuttal. So what does that mean? That means we've been showing you how the proposition team's mindset is wrong, which means there are disadvantages with the proposition team. On top of that, my partners have brought up several other substantives showing you why we shouldn't vote proposition, showing you why we should stick with the status quo instead. So what does this mean? We have shown you why the status quo is better. We've shown you why you shouldn't vote for the proposition, and we've also shown you why you should vote for the opposition. Not just the disadvantages to their claims, but also the advantages of sticking with what we have. Let's go on to the next point, which was saying, yes, if you go to jail, then the kids go to rehab. If the parents go to jail, then the kids automatically go to rehab. Our response to this is that's not in all cases. Yes, rehab is an option. However, that's not all cases. As a matter of fact, I believe it was the second proposition speaker that said that jail is kind of like rehab. Excuse me, no. That was the first proposition nearing the end of nearing the beginning of their protected time. That said that jail is kind of like rehab. So really, if you want the rehabilitation that the proposition team is asking you to implement, then you might suggest going to jail. But besides that, what we also see is that there are other environments, not just rehab, that these students go to. Like they could say that rehabilitation would be going to a different school. If they were to go to a separate school, what is saying that the bully would stop? On top of that, bullying was not a crime. Really quickly, I'd like to cover one quick point. It's a legal system. It's a legal system. When we look at the law, we need to say that it's not the people that influence the criminal that committed the crime. Rather, it is the criminal themselves. This is the exact philosophy like if you were to say Islam. There are radical Islamists. And when they commit an act of terror against a society that is deemed to be a crime, you don't charge the religion of Islam, that is the teacher. You don't charge the teachers of that crime. Rather, you charge the person that committed the crime with the crime. That is how the legal system works. You don't charge the people that influence the criminal per se. You charge the person that committed the crime. At the end of the day, what have we seen? Yes, the proposition team's intentions are indeed admirable. Yes, it would be nice. It would be nice if we could have the advantages that they claim. But unfortunately, you can't always get what you want. But if you try sometimes, you just might find you get what you need. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that oh so quotable speech. And I would now like to call upon Ben to provide the opposition reply speech.
The second prop speaker mentioned what a parent's role is. Let's say that you have a friend and your parents don't like that friend. What's their job? Is their job to tell you, hey bud, I don't like that friend, I think he's a shady character. But what's your initial response? Whenever my parents tell me they don't like one of my friends, I never have a positive reaction. I always have a negative reaction. My parents say you did something wrong, I never have, oh, you're right, I'm completely wrong. There's always a negative reaction. Even if they're doing the right thing, I can have a negative reaction. And the problem is the proposition team punishes the good parents whenever they're trying to do the right thing. That's absolutely absurd. That is not moral. That should absolutely not happen. I want to summarize and show you how we should absolutely take this debate. The first point that I want to mention is it the parents' fault? I believe that's what the motion was asking us. Is it the parents' fault? Are they the ones liable? It's pretty much stated in the motion. Now what they said, or what my opponents in the proposition said, is the parents, it's their fault because the parents are responsible for 100% of their upbringing. My first initial responses were examples and exceptions, showing you how the parents are not actually always responsible for the initial upbringing. We mentioned how an orphan doesn't even have parents. How are their parents responsible for the initial upbringing, or 100% of it, if they don't even have parents? Next, we mentioned how an LGBT student or a kid, if he's being abused, is it the parents' fault for him being abused? Is it the parents' fault for the people abusing him? To which they responded, oh, bullying, therefore, will be stopped because parents would say, hey, bud, bullying's a bad idea. I gotta go to jail now because you just bullied someone. But instead, in their model, it mentioned only extreme cases, like robbing a bank or assaulting someone. I'm pretty sure, under my understanding, bullying isn't illegal and therefore wouldn't be stopped. Which means, even if the parents are good, an LGBT student could be abused and do something wrong, and the parents would actually be liable, even though it was somebody abusing them, not the parents abusing them. Under the proposition team, it's immoral because they're charging the parents, even if the parents are good. Because lots of times, kids can react to things in a negative way. We can have a negative response to a positive action. In this instance, what my opponents do, or they give people a positive incentive to do something negative. If you want to go drink alcohol or steal alcohol underage or steal it illegally, you're not going to be put in jail for that. Your parents are going to be put in jail for that. That's completely immoral. Next, Austin summarized and mentioned the reductio ad absurdum. Also, how if you take it to its logical extent, say that because somebody subscribes to the religion of Islam and they committed an act of terror or violence, that means everybody in Islam is responsible because they did it because of their religion or what they perceive to be their religion? Absolutely not. Because somebody commits an act of violence, it's not their parents' fault for it. It could be their environment, but it's absolutely not their parents' fault, and their parents should not be liable. It should be the person committing the act of violence or terrorism. In that instance, the terrorism example came from that point. Next, I mentioned the functional family, how it creates a better functional family. I actually disagree with this completely, because you're giving the kids the ultimate power to say, hey, Dad, I don't like what you said. I want to stay up way later than that. So either you let me stay up late, or I'm going to go rob a car. Well, your dad has two responses. Either, number one, to let you go rob a car, or to do what? Keep you inside his house and not let you go anywhere. Otherwise, he can get in big trouble for that. What are you doing? You're creating an environment that is hostile for the children, not actually positive for the children. You're rewarding the negative. You're not rewarding the positive. Under the opposition team, we reward the positive because we're saying if you're a good kid, no, you're not going to go to jail. If you're a good kid, you're going to listen to your parents and you're not going to go to jail. But if you're a bad kid under the proposition team, they don't go to jail. If you're a bad kid, your parents go to jail. And you give them all the ability to abuse their parents and make them submissive to the children. I believe that a child is a privilege, not a duty, which is absolutely why we oppose the motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and it is now time for Juliana to once again come to the stage and deliver the proposition reply as the last speech of today on the prelims of ARGO.
Mr. Speaker, just like I asked in a POI, it is not the duty of the judicial system to educate your child about responsibility. It is the duty of the judicial system, however, to prosecute the guilty person. But do you know whose job it is to teach the child about individual responsibility that they claim is going haywire under our model? Yes, the parent. If you find out that the motion has been implemented and your first instinct is, yes, time to rob a car because my mom screamed at me yesterday and I can use that for manipulation and blackmail, your parent might have missed a little lessons to teach you about personal responsibility. And yes, if you rob that car, your parent should totally go to jail because you had those instincts. Because listen, nobody is born knowing what responsibility is. Nobody comes out of the uterus knowing all of the principles that they should guide their life by. It is your parents' duty to teach you, right? Not the laws that we make the system by. In this match, 3 reality checks on the case that they have brought to us today. Firstly, kids will actually be punished under our system. What we're proposing is that we are separating the children from a comfy home with parents that they know and potentially love or don't, doesn't matter, and we're sending them to a strange house with strange people where they'll be taken care of by one person together with 19 other kids. We are not exactly setting up the best circumstances in which they won't be able to learn personal responsibility. And even if that weren't true, we told you it's not our duty to teach them, it's the parents' duty. Reality check number 2. It does not fall under the motion and under their burden to talk about minority discrimination. Why? Because they agreed that this is a comparative debate. So their burden is to show us that the child is guiltier than the parent. And our burden is to prove that the parent is guiltier than the child. Very oversimplified, I know, but follow with me. Bullying here does not matter because your child is not 100% guilty either, right? If you set the bar for us that we have to prove that the parent is 100% guilty, you're not proving the child is 100% guilty either. So it's fine. And also, it's fine because this is a comparative debate. So somebody gets the bad rap for community bullying either way because you can't prosecute a community, right? This is entirely off motion and it was deserved to be ignored from the start. Reality check number 3. Nobody is going to sue you because your child accidentally grabbed their phone, just like nobody sues you in your system. Nobody sues the parents directly in the system. They're not going to sue the child in any sort of system, right? We are not talking about this. We're talking about extremely serious crimes that you can't just drop off as examples randomly. We believe that at the end of this debate, because we have seen that they have actually, as they have claimed, brought no constructive point. They underburdened themselves by saying that from the burden that they accepted, us understanding that they do not want to talk about the long-term repercussions, which they actually did, and the fact that we believe we have proved our burden, in which we have shown you that, yes, indeed, on a comparative scale, the parent weighs more responsibility than the child, that we do not have a significant backlash on the population, rather, we are improving the way that these relationships are being formed, and because we allow these children a better life moving on forward, recognizing the validity and the true causes of their opinions, we beg you to propose.
I thank the speakers for the debate. Please go off the floor and shake hands. And since it's a close round, pack up your bags and enjoy the rest of the day.